Welcome everybody. Thanks for joining our first webinar of 2025, Flats Recycling, and why you should think about closing refuse chutes. I owe a huge thanks to panelists that have agreed to join us today for this webinar on Flats Recycling, why we should close refuse chutes. So we say, don't just take it from me. Let's hear what the experienced practitioners have got to say. You'll be hearing from Helen Scott from Sheffield City Council, Dean Butterworth, also from Sheffield City Council, Harriet Turpin, Borough of Hackney, and Adam Briggs from Citizen Housing. So I think it's going to be a really interesting session. Everybody's agreed to share their experience around closing chutes and the reasons why they did that. We've got a lot to get through, so I'm not going to do a long introduction. We're going to hand over now to Helen.
Okay, thank you, Nigel. Hello, good morning, everybody. So my name's Helen Scott and I work for Sheffield City Council, and I'm the service manager in our estates and environmental services team. So why did we close our chutes in Sheffield? So we have 24 tower blocks across the city, and to date we've closed 4 of those, and they were all single staircase. That chute closure was part of a wider scope of programmed fire safety work to those blocks. So the primary reason for closure was therefore fire and building safety. However, what it did do is it addressed several historic problems which we had and still have with chutes across the city. One of the main ones, which many of you will be able to relate to, is blockages. The hopper heads and chute size are no longer fit for purpose. These blocks were built in the 1960s, so the chutes were built with kind of small bags in mind, and obviously people these days are now putting larger black sacks and other things down there. So it's a huge resource issue to kind of address those blockages across the city. Odour is also a problem. We don't have an ongoing chute cleaning programme here in Sheffield, so that is a problem, and we get a number of complaints about smells coming from the chutes. We did do a trial a few months back where we cleaned the chutes on one of the tower blocks, and it did have an impact straight away, but we found very quickly that those problems came back. So really, for there to be any major impact, we determined that we needed a schedule in place for chute cleaning, which unfortunately at the moment we don't have the budget for. Noise pollution is also an issue. People throw all sorts down the chutes, but even you kind of just your glass jars, can make quite a large noise when going down, which is obviously impacts on the residents in the block. Flies from food waste, so where bags haven't been tied securely, and this food waste that has sort of spilled out into the chutes and got stuck onto the inside, is an issue. And really just a general impact on the cleanliness and hygiene of communal areas. So where people have left bags outside hopper heads, without putting them down the chutes, and they've created spillages and so on. But also the fire risk that creates by leaving black bags and other things next to the hopper heads. It's a huge problem for us. So just a couple of pictures there in terms of some of the things that we experience. So bags being left, rather than being put down the chute, where we've not kind of rotated bins quick enough, and they've become overflowing underneath the chutes. And pizza boxes, huge problem for us, where people have tried to put those down the chutes, and that's obviously created blockages. So how we got approval, being a local authority, we may have different approval routes to many of you on the call. Back when we did the first 4 tower blocks, it was a cabinet member approval route. At that time, it was a £7 million capital allocation that we had. That work was completed in July 2024. Moving on, we are going to be closing the chutes on the remaining 20 tower blocks across the city. But we now have a committee system in place, so any approval will go to our housing policy committee, but we're now looking at a £45 million capital allocation for that piece of work. All our capital budgets are approved by full council, but any variations or slippages in terms of the programme as we move through is managed internally by officers via our homes programme group, which is chaired by the head of investment. So how did we get residents on board? Obviously, letters, newsletters. We had some in-person events where people could come and look at the design of the external provision that we were going to be putting in place. It was important that we liaise with the tenants and residents associations in the areas and also the local councillors too. So information was key, really. We did have some negativity that was expected, but it was just important that we dealt with that negativity as quickly as possible and gave customers as much information as we could. We carried out equalities impact assessments, and what that did is it allowed us to understand the demographic profile of each block and highlighted any vulnerabilities with customers that lived in those areas. And it just meant that we could tailor our approach in terms of that. So yeah, continuous engagement throughout, what would be happening, when, how. We did have some of our waste support officers on site throughout the process, really just answer any questions and deal with any concerns that the customers may have had. And what we did do that worked really well is we had a transition period. So rather than the change happening overnight, we had about a 4-week period whereby the chutes were still open, but the external bin provision was also there to use. So it just gave customers, a little bit of time to adapt to the changes. And obviously it was a massive change for many customers. So there was a need to re-educate customers on how they now needed to dispose of the waste correctly. So did it increase our estate management duties? Well, there is a need now to, certainly after a weekend, to ensure that any kind of excess waste is cleared from the external provision, where bins have become full and customers have left bags, in and around those bin pods. Also on one of the tower blocks, it is very close to some neighbouring masonette blocks. So often what we do find is that those customers tend to come across and use the bins that are really for the tower block. So that can create some capacity issues. But on the whole, there's less waste obviously left on internal landings because the hopper heads are no longer there. And this was a huge resource issue for us, whereby we've got estate staff having to walk, every morning 15 blocks of 15 floors, of each block, just to check any communal waste that had been left. And obviously no longer any blockages in those tower blocks to deal with, and no need to rotate the bins. So we've had to maybe change how we do things and manage things slightly differently, but on the whole it's not increased the workload at all, really. And then finally, have we seen any increase in recycling? Well, yes. A number of these blocks didn't have any provision in place prior to chute closure. So we've obviously seen a large increase in recycling around the blocks. There was a need, again, to sort of increase information and educate customers about how to recycle correctly. So we did that with educational packs, ensuring that signage was correct, and also sort of the apertures on the external provision was right in terms of ensuring that there was no cross-contamination of bins with general waste. But what it has done is it's highlighted that there's actually a need for more provision. Customers have really got on board and are recycling more so. So that's been a real positive. And that's it for me. And I'll just hand over to Dean Butterworth now.
Thank you very much, Helen. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Helen, on that. My bit's going to talk more around the regulatory side of things, and you probably hear quite a bit of this potentially in some of the other presentations that you're going to get as well. Through regulation, there's various things that we've got to make sure that we do. So if anybody that's working in the building safety world at the moment knows that we've got to check fire doors. There's a potential in the future that we might have to check window safety in high-rise blocks. We need to be checking smoke seals on hoppers and other door plates. Some of the challenges that we've got is how do we comply with the regulation and the requirements that are in there at the minute. We know potentially some of the customers that we deal with don't want to let us in to their properties. It's a challenge that we've got. So when we're saying that we're going to check your hopper head, we're going to make sure that these seals are working adequately. How do we get into those properties? Because one, the regulator of social housing and the building safety regulator in many instances will require us to demonstrate that we've put adequate systems in place to be able to demonstrate that we are 100% compliant. One of the things about keeping your hoppers, for argument's sake, is as a landlord, if you can't get into a property to check one of those hoppers is still safe, are you actually going to take that resident to court, one, to either force access, and if they continue not to let you in, are you actually going to evict that customer because there is a regulatory requirement on you to get in there? Bin chutes are a challenge for us, as Helen's outlined, in relation to the maintenance. They get blocked on a regular basis. Fire services across the country are all different. Some of you will be working with fire services who are saying, yes, you can keep your bin chutes as long as you put adequate measures in place to make sure that they are safe. Some of the other fire services that you will deal with, such as Sheffield and South Yorkshire, will go, close them quickly. If you don't close them quickly, we're going to serve you with a prohibition notice. We had an experience back in January 2023 where the fire service knew that we were closing a bin chute, and 2 days before we were due to complete the work, they decided to serve us with a prohibition notice at 4 o'clock in an afternoon and told us we've got to empty every flat within that building and rehouse them temporarily. Obviously, that is a challenge for organisations who've got high-risk, high-rise buildings. Fortunately, we managed to allay that by putting a wake and watch in, but there are lots of regulatory issues that we need to address. So one of the things I just want to talk about is who's responsible for making some of these decisions to either close chutes or make sure that we are demonstrating to the key regulatory agencies, whether it's building safety regulator, regulator of social housing, your fire service, or whoever it is, including the ombudsman, that you've got appropriate governance routes in place. So one of the questions I would ask yourself is, do you know who your responsible person is? Who is the ultimate person responsible? It doesn't have to be a person, it can be the organisation. But is that very clear and is that very clearly set out for you as officers and also your organisation? So you'll know for your high risk, high rise buildings that you will have the PID boxes, the personal information boxes at the bottom. They should actually include who your responsible person is. So if it's not there, find out who the responsible person is, and also make sure that they are very clear about what their roles and responsibilities are. So for argument's sake, in Sheffield, Ajman Ali, who's the Executive Director of Neighbourhood Services, is the responsible person. One of the challenges that I pose to yourselves is, once you've identified who that responsible person is, when they go on leave for 2 weeks, do you have a deputy? Who covers that responsibility? Do you have a proper chain of command that says who is making the decisions on all issues related to fire safety and building safety? So if you need a decision making, you've got full governance, full tracking of the decision making, and it's very clear and accountable who is doing what. So who's your accountable person? So on the panel today, I would say that you're an accountable person. You're not a responsible person. That sits higher up the chain. I'm an accountable person, but do we know who we are? And again, there are more than one accountable people in an organisation should something happen. So I know that I've got an equivalent number head of service for neighbourhood services who's responsible for the people living in the buildings. He's also an accountable person. But again, it's fully understanding if I go on leave, who deputises for me? If all the other accountable people go on leave, who's covering there? So just for an example, that we've put the wonderful world of iMist in 4 of our tower blocks. The iMist system at the moment has got a habit of popping its seals and then leaking into electrics, which has happened twice over the last 2 weeks. What we've had to do as a consequence of that is make very quick, pragmatic decisions around, do we install waking watch? Do we move to a simultaneous evacuation? You need to make sure you've got people on the ground who understand the requirements and the regulation who can make those decisions. But also recognise if you've not got those systems in place and something goes wrong, what are the consequences? So it's the consequences for the responsible people and also the accountable people within the organisation. So even though you're working for a corporate organisation, due to changes in legislation, you as individuals, as responsible and accountable people, are now potentially subject to personal fines. So it's incumbent on yourselves to make sure that you know what those systems are. Risk assessment. how many of you risk assess your bin chutes? How many of you are risk assessing other aspects of your building safety? And when I say risk assessments, it's very clear of understanding what you've got, understanding the risks, understanding the alternative options, putting in place mitigations, making sure that you fully understand if something happens, what the consequences are and what you're going to do about that. So what we're doing at the moment is we're doing, as part of our requirement to have the building safety case for all of our high risk buildings, we're putting risk assessments into place as an addendum to those so that we're risk assessing all aspects of safety. So what we are assessing is the structural integrity. So how well are your bin chutes built and can they withstand fire? So you might have a bin chute that actually in itself gets rid of your waste, gets rid of the rubbish. But actually, if there's a fire in there, what's the integrity of that? How quickly would it collapse? How quickly would the fire then leak into other properties? How fire resistant are the properties that are attached to your bin chutes? Are they properly compartmentalised? If they're not compartmentalised, where is the failure within the structure? And what are you going to do then to make sure that you can prevent the spread of fire? Potential vulnerabilities within your systems. And this, I'm talking about systems now, not people, because that's a completely separate debate around vulnerabilities of people living in your properties. What would cause a chute to fail, such as a blockage or a damage? And then what's the risk to you? So if you don't inspect your chutes on a regular basis and you don't identify a blockage and there's a fire in one of the bin store areas underneath and you've not got a dampness system on, what is the consequence of that happening within the building? Because most bin chutes, as we know, act as chimneys within a building. So unless we've got safe ways of working, it's going to be a problem. And then understanding the potential hazards. What could injure people? So if you've got your hopper heads that are attached to individual flats, like we've still got some, the individual flats will fill with smoke. And what's the implications there? Some hoppers are in communal areas. So again, if those bin seals are not working, what's the issue there? Are your automatic opening vents working well enough? Have you got enough ventilation? What's the issue and the challenge in relation to that? So what I would implore people to do is, if you've not considered undertaking risk assessments for your bin chutes, do one. Find out how you complete it. And I say, if anybody wants any guidance and advice on how to complete a risk assessment for that, I'm more than happy for Nigel to give my details and I'll send some advice in relation to how that can be undertaken. So again, risk assessments, the benefits, identifying hazards and vulnerabilities, determine the actions that you can take, and helps to understand if the building is compliant within the building safety regulations. If you can tick all of those boxes and you've still got bin chutes, then you're okay. But don't sit on your laurels, particularly with bin chutes. But what actions can be taken? You can install fire resistant shutters at the base of the chutes. So I'm guessing that probably still lots of your high risk buildings have still got manual shutters at the bottom, so that if you need to close the chutes, somebody's physically got to go in and actually close them down. Whereas nowadays you can have the automatic dampness systems on, so when a temperature within a bin storage area gets to a particular temperature, it will automatically shut. So ensure that if you're keeping your bin chute, make sure they are serviced on a regular basis, and that is not just the cleaning, but it's also checking the structural integrity. Have you got structural reports that say your bin chute's integrity is solid? Or understanding if there are challenges with the bin chute, what work needs to be done in relation to actually the chute itself, the hopper head, and the closing mechanism at the bottom. Ensure the chute is not used for toxic or hazardous materials. This is a challenge, isn't it? Because we've had all sorts thrown down our bin chutes, and I'm sure all of you have. We've had coffee tables thrown down. We've had snooker tables thrown down. You would not think they were big enough, but anything that can go down a bin chute, we've experienced it. But the toxic and hazardous materials is not something that we're used to. So if you've got fumes that are coming back up, how do we prevent those? Ensure chutes are not operated in high winds. This is one thing that we hadn't considered until we'd done the risk assessment. If you've got a bin storeroom linked to a bin chute, there is very high winds, the wind can actually get into the bin storeroom because it's not sealed properly. It will create a chimney scenario within that building. So either make sure that your bin storerooms are properly sealed in relation to wind, or understand the conditions for when you've got to close those bin stores down. So I think it's tomorrow, the winds are going to touch 50 miles an hour. What's your benchmark for closing your bin chutes? Because wind will have an impact on those. And I say, if any of your bin chutes are not being operated, or any of the components are damaged, close them down and have an alternative provision in place to make sure that people can get rid of their waste. Okay, so the ways forward, and this is the Sheffield way in terms of minimising all the risks. So South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue expect us to close all of our bin chutes down, which we're now going to have within a programme. It'll take 2 years to close the bin chutes down, part of a wider programme of high-rise building improvements, and that's going to cost 45 million to do. We've completed the 4 single staircase tower blocks, and we've got 20 blocks to complete. So we're going to start on site in 26, but we're going to close all the bin chutes first, so they'll be done by January 27. Early planning is needed within this, because from our experience, we've got to try and take people, the hearts and minds of our residents to that, because somebody who's been living on the 15th floor of a tower block, who've always thrown their bin liner down the bin chute, and now you're telling them that they've got to walk out when it's snowing and raining and everything else, they're not going to be happy. But again, use the information that you've got from the regulator to say, look, some of this is out of our control. This is your fire regulator saying that you've got to do it. Early planning for location and design. If you've got high-rise buildings that are in city centre location, your land is going to be the premium. So where do you put your waste provision externally to make sure that you're maximising, one, opportunities, but also two, to make sure that those areas are not going to be misused. We've got lots of tower blocks in Sheffield that are far away from the city centre, but then we also have 4 that are slap bang in the city centre. And we know that those waste areas will get more misuse than any of the others. So making sure you fully understand that. Ongoing communications with customers, important, but it's not just your customers, it's other stakeholders as well, such as your locally elected members if you're a local authority, your board if you're a housing association, because you will get grief. That is guaranteed for closing your bin chutes. Implications for ongoing fire risk assessments. Obviously, you've got to do your FRAs every year. You're guaranteed through those FRAs to get some immediate actions, some 1 week actions and 1 month actions. What are you doing to make sure you understand the risk of those and closing those down within the appropriate timescales? That is particularly more important now, because as the regulator of social housing is going around to each organisation, they will be asking you to verify your data. What have you got outstanding? How long has it been outstanding? What risk is it? And what are your plans to close them down? And finally on that, review the risk assessment. If you don't have a risk assessment, start one. Start to think what that looks like, so you can start to second guess and future plan what the problems might be and how you're going to overcome and mitigate those. And I think that's my final slide.
Thank you, Dean. That's outstanding. Really appreciate that. We're now handing over to Harriet, please.
Thanks, Nigel. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. So hi everyone, and I'm here today to give a little bit of an overview of Hackney's approach to improving fire safety and improving recycling on estates through the closure of chutes. We've had introductions, but for those of you who don't know, I'm Harriet Turpin, Project Manager at Hackney Council, lead on the Estates Recycling Programme team. So I just wanted to give a little bit of an overview of Hackney generally. We're very much got probably people from all different areas. So Hackney in itself is a very densely populated borough, and in terms of our stock, we are largely estate-based properties comparing to street level. So we do have an increasing pressure on recycling and fire safety with the growing housing stock. And also we are a very diverse borough with many areas of affluent and many areas of deprivation, which kind of makes the challenges harder. So a little bit about the challenges. I think we've had this kind of covered by some of the other speakers, but yes, as we know, estates do have a lower recycling rate than their counter street level properties. And as estate stocks continue to grow, we're finding more barriers. Barriers are already in place for residents to recycle on estates. We've got, the lack of service provision, lack of services, and then get the behaviour around chute systems. So chute systems have been available for a very long time. However, they're not in line with the waste world of today, making them quite subject to being blocked or kind of not being used correctly. And that kind of makes it harder for residents to recycle because they've got a conveniently located chute right outside their doors, and it makes it easier for them to dispose of their waste rather than taking it down to the recycling bins. And therefore, it's really important that we make it easier for our residents to recycle on estates. So just a bit of a visual representation of where Hackney is with its recycling rates, street level comparative to estates. So street levels are performing a lot higher than our estates. So it's really important, if we want to meet national targets, that we look to how and what and why estates are performing low and how we can improve it. So that's kind of the challenges from a recycling aspect, but I think, as we know, there's this growing challenges and kind of added reason why we want to do these works, and that's around the fire safety. There's been an increasing amount of fires happening on, or at least publicised fires happening on, our tower blocks, and there's increasing interest in looking at ways to make the bin chutes and bin stores more fire safe and not make any impact that's less catastrophic. So there's increasing pressure and interest to do that, and it's also a co-benefit of doing the works of what we do. So it's the recycling improvements and the improving of fire safety. And I think you've covered this already very well, but there's the Building Safety Act and the increasing policy and legislation that we need to kind of think about. So it's really important, post Grenfell especially, that we are making our HRBs as safe as possible. The ERP that I work on initially was a recycling initiative, but we very much have adopted this fire safety culture as well, because what we're doing to the bins by closing the chutes and building bin stores is making it not only improving the recycling, but also making these buildings and the bin store areas and chute closures safer. So that's a little bit of context of why it is that we're pushing to do the works that we do at Hackney. What it is that we're doing. So we're the Estates Recycling Programme. It's an ongoing programme similar to what Sheffield have been doing, where we started as a very small pilot and then grew into more business as usual. And through lessons learned, I found quite a kind of modular approach to how we can kind of make this roll out across the whole borough. To date, we've delivered works on 17 estates in the whole of Hackney, and we are looking to do another 24 estates, and that has been signed off, and that'll be our phase 6. So we're doing that in the next 2 years. I won't cover this too much, but just for a bit of context, we started as one phase which trialled and errored many different kind of recycling based initiatives on our Hackney housing, and that was using adding bins, communications, and fundamentally it was found out that the best way to make change is to actually make the infrastructure available and appropriate and with the right capacities, and that's kind of led us to get to where we are today. So moving on. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context to what it is that we're doing through pictures. So you can see there we've got lots of recycling bins located up next to a substation, which is a big no-no. So it's just moving. And then we've got the new bin store, which is to the left of the screen, and then you can see how we're moving those bins away from the danger and then closing the chutes. Residents have to come down and then they can dispose of their waste, recycling, food waste all at the same location rather than having this kind of use the chute for that. So if they're coming down to recycle, then they have to kind of use the waste to recycle bins at the same time. So that's a little example there. And then we've got some before and afters. You can kind of see it's not just about improving recycling and the fire safety, but also making it easier for crews. We've got, really bins on uneven surfaces there, really hard for them to kind of get that up and down from collection point of view. So it's making the services nice and even for them. And then, just generally improving the kind of estate environment and making it look nicer for residents and easier. So that's some examples there. And then the next slide is around, you've got some examples here again of some poor placement of bins, just kind of looking a bit kind of, unattractive, and with that it means that it gets more fly tipping and used and antisocial behaviour. And then just moving on to the next one, got some examples of some metro stores here. So there's obviously situations where we are really limited space and we've got a lot of conflicting, conflicting priorities from different service areas, trying to space on estates for different things, cycle hangers, etc. So it's really hard to sometimes find a location. And sometimes it does mean that we fall within that 6 meters. So we're just, well, where we are up against a building or close to a building, we will put a metro store in just to improve the fire safety from that aspect. So that's some examples there. And then with the chutes themselves, we've done a match existing finish just to kind of make it like residents. Once you take it away, it's not there anymore. It's trying to make, because I think there's, sometimes you can weld them shut or just kind of like put a board over them, but we really wanted to take them away and make it look like they were never there in the first place to really encourage that behavior change. So that's some examples there. And just from results, so to date, you can kind of see the green represents the post-recycling tonnage. So how we get our data is through fill rate monitoring from officers and tonnage monitoring from our crew. So they'll take weights before and after. So on the estates we've done the works, in most instances, we've seen the recycling rate absolutely increase or double. But there have been some instances, one where the recycling rate's gone down. And then I would like to note that's the estate we didn't close the chutes. And so there is definitely a relationship between closing the chutes and obviously not closing them. I would say if you enclose the chutes, I definitely think it has a more positive impact on the recycling rate generally. And then obviously on estates we only added a couple recycling bins, and we haven't seen the recycling rate jump as high. So I'm just this is my last couple of slides, I'll keep it quick, but generally speaking, I just wanted to cover how we would get to this point. And firstly, I just wanted to say about getting a really strong business case in place and getting internal stakeholder buy-in. I think that was the main thing for us, to get buy-in from other areas in the council. So working really closely with the fire safety team, waste services, and showing how it's a co-benefit approach. And then, having a really strong waste storage and planning guidance, i.e. bins should be, no more than 25 walking distance for residents. Crew shouldn't have to go more than 10 meters to collect, and then bins should be 6 meters away. I think having that kind of policy and business case in place is really important. 2 is having a prioritization list, like which estates do you think are the most important to get done first? And we used the FRA, so fire safety actions, the number of chute blockages, how many recycling bins does the estate have, and then any other planned programs in the council, can you kind of, work together on that? And then if there's any political traction. We did do a pilot study first, which I was saying I'd encourage doing a smaller study, seeing, what lessons learned, and then putting that on an upscale. Consultation and procurement, having a really strong consultation is obviously really important, because you are making a change to a resident space, so it's making sure they do feel it's a balanced approach, but making sure they feel as part of, especially in the design aspect. If you don't have an assisted collection in place, I would strongly recommend getting one, and that's for residents who are vulnerable. And just making sure your procurement package is kind of, as competitive and accurate and as it can be. We did direct contract award as well, which I think had its benefits, and using many different communication methods. Lastly, the specifications, making sure those bin stores are spec'd to the best possible ability. Do they have the correct capacity? Can you create efficiencies for crews? Having the internal staff come and look at what you're proposing. Look to really reduce that antisocial behaviour, not increase it. We've definitely had some lessons learned on that one, where bins have been put in the wrong place, and then we've had to rectify that. So I think being really open-minded and getting as many people to kind of look over those is super important. Results, and data capture. Obviously, get as much data as you can. We use the recycling tonnage data, the number of chute blockages, repair costs on our chutes. So we get those. So how many repairs have been, put out for chute blockages or hopper repairs? Because essentially, if you're taking it away, that cost will go. And then just service efficiencies and code benefits, expand and grow, and then try and get that once you're in a situation as business as usual. So that's that, and then moving on to the last slide, I think. Yeah, that's it from me. So thank you. I think there's questions at the end, so if there's anything anyone has, and my contact details are there if anyone wants to get in touch directly. So thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Harriet. That's brilliant. Really appreciate that. So lastly then, we're looking to Adam. Adam, take it away, please.
Good morning, everyone. I'm going to be on fast forward, I think, to be able to get all the questions in, because I've seen some questions drop into the chat, and obviously some people will be holding them off to the end of the presentation. So I'll go as quickly as I can. I have noticed a couple of spelling mistakes on my presentation, so I'll apologise in advance. I tried to mitigate that at the beginning, but before my presentation, but I think they're still in there, so apologies. So just a quick introduction to myself in relation to where we're at and why I'm here doing what I'm doing. My name's Adam Briggs, for those of you on the call who don't know me. I've got 18 years experience working in fire safety management, fire engineering consultancy. Currently, I am working for Citizen Housing in the West Midlands, here in sunny Birmingham at the moment. We cover the whole of the West Midlands area, Coventry, Birmingham, Hereford and Worcester. We have 36 high-rise tower blocks and 24 mid-rise blocks. And we're in the process, or I'm in the process of being responsible for compiling the building safety case reports. We've had 4 called in at the moment, and we're just going through that whole rigorous test from the BSR, the Building Safety Regulator, to check that, make sure that we've got all of our ducks in a row, and we do know where all of our ducks are, to be fair. But yeah, so that's where we're at now. And I'm currently working, as it mentioned before, with regards to the customers and other stakeholders within the organisation. Now, one of the reasons why we chose to close our bin chutes mainly is for safer people, safer customers within our blocks, various different ages, various locations of chutes within the blocks. So we needed to maintain the safety of the people. Obviously, on the back of that, we're making safer buildings, and we have a safer response, not a safety response. So a safer response. And what I mean by that is when the fire service come, they're in a safer position because they're only dealing with a fire within a particular area of a building, if they're dealing with one. The customers, the residents, can actually evacuate the building nice and safely. So that's one of the reasons why, or the main reasons why, we look to close the bin chutes. So how we did it. So we identified one estate in the Hillfields area of Coventry, which had 4 tower blocks, very similar to Sheffield in relation to identifying 4 tower blocks. We engaged with the customers, the people who lived there. We told them what we were looking at doing and the whys we were doing them. We did a drop-in session. We allowed them to come in, speak to us, ask us questions. And what we said internally was, if we can't answer the questions that the customers have got, this is never going to work. So we had a rigorous Q&A session in relation to what the questions could be asked. And they'll come apparent whilst I'm talking throughout the presentation. And obviously we worked with Metro Store in relation to the size of what we needed, size of the bin stalls externally, the locations. And as I say, we've successfully done 1, and we're moving on to the next 3 within the areas, within the Hillfields area. So closure of the bin chutes, what the challenges are, assisted or additional collections. So what we identified by engaging with the customers, that we needed to add in different collection times to be able to walk the block and change and remove the waste for customers that couldn't easily just get into the lift with their waste and go downstairs and chuck it in the Metro Store units. Now that was for not necessarily people with mobility issues, but it's also for family reasons. So people with small families who can't just quickly grab hold of the bag and run out of the house or run out of the flat and go downstairs. They've got to take the family down, sort it all out, and then go back up. So it was a big challenge for us to be able to identify what we needed to do with that. So within all of our high-rise tower blocks, we've got building safety officers or building safety managers as such, but our building safety officers cover 10 blocks each, and they have a particular program where they go into the blocks for assisted collections. Now, the reason why I've put additional collections in the second line, that wasn't a typo. The additional collections is relating to people who are taken ill or taken injured for a very short period of time or a particular short period of time. So we've had to open up the kind of communication with the customer in relation to, if you have any issues in relation to removing your waste and taking it down to the external bin storage area, give us a shout and we'll make ourselves available. So what we mean by that is we've got the building safety officers on site quite regularly. We've got the neighbourhood services and neighbourhood officers that are on site as well. And in certain areas, in certain buildings, we've got caretakers as well. So they can assist with the waste collection on those additional short-term periods. Obviously, monitoring the buildings and surrounding areas is very important. So again, like I say, the building safety officers, the neighbourhood officers are going out there and checking. When we implemented this initially, I was actually scared to go into the Hillfields area. And if there's anybody on this call from the Hillfields area, I'll explain why. Because we implemented this and we did have a little bit of kickback in relation to the customers, in relation to why you're taking away something that's perfect, working perfectly, etc., etc. Now, we worked with the customers in relation to where the bins were going to be. Now, the reason why we talked about where they were going to be is because we wanted it to be a natural occurring passage where people go out of the block, they walk past the bin chute area to drop their waste off, and they can go on their merry way. Now, we had, as I say, we had a little bit of kickback in relation to that, but I can say hand on heart, it's worked really, really well. We implemented this around, I would say, 3 months ago. And within that period of time, we've had 2 pieces of waste left in the communal space. And we've identified where they are within minutes and removed them quite easily. So that's been obviously our main challenge. Ongoing support, creating that kind of like family atmosphere is where we're working with the customer and the customer is working with us. We have a high-rise living forum where we discuss things in relation to waste management, recycling, etc., to make sure that we're identifying where we're going to go next on our little journey of a risk-by-risk basis, identifying which blocks we're going to tackle next. Okay, so chute closure plan. Obviously, complete the Hillfields pilot. We've got another 3 buildings. We had it planned for this financial year, so we will hopefully get them all done by April. Now, that is a challenge in itself because we've had to involve other stakeholders that we weren't necessarily considering at the beginning. One of them was the architects, landscape architects, because we're changing the certain areas within the Hillfields area. Now, what we didn't want to do is we didn't want to go ahead and change the bins and then all of a sudden them have to come back and rejig them around. So we've had to wait for that program to go ahead. So I suppose that could fall into one of the challenges. We working through our stock in relation to the 36 or the remaining 32 blocks on a risk by risk basis. That is part of the building safety case and the building safety case report. It goes into the action plan. So when the building is called in, we can actually say, yeah, we've identified this and it is on our program to be completed by X time. What we don't want to do is we don't want to leave it blank on the building safety case report and then all of a sudden it become an issue in the future by the building safety regulator or any incident that occurs. Schedule the closures, as I say, in relation to the building safety case report and then complete. We're a little bit slower than Sheffield, I think, on this. We're going to be doing it within 3 years. The reason for that is because we're actually looking at the mid-rise blocks as well, because we have a challenge of other aspects within the estates that we need to look at as well. So we'll probably be doing our mid-rise blocks and our high-rise blocks kind of concurrently. Okay, so the conclusion is that obviously we felt and customers feel that it's quite daunting, especially when we're trying to please everyone. If we tried to please everyone, we would all sell ice cream effectively. We wouldn't do what we're doing. because it's really, really difficult to please everyone. But pleasing everybody and making everybody safe is slightly different. So engaging with the customer is a massive thing. As I mentioned to you before, the High Rise Living Forum, we get customers in, we get them on a monthly basis. We talk about the issues, we talk about the challenges, we talk about how we communicate with one another and the processes that we do. So we involve them in the process going forward. And I suppose the last sentence is kind of like a little bit of an offering. We're more than happy to discuss our process, where we're at with it and where we're going with it. And we're happy to invite people over for a little site visit or a site walk, and maybe a little bit of a clash our heads together and get some ideas and help you on your journey if you haven't already started this, because we think it's been going really, really well. So thank you very much for listening to me, and I think there's 4 minutes left for questions.
Thank you, Adam. That's really, really helpful. So
I'm so glad I wasn't on mute.
No, thank you, Adam, and thanks for everyone with all the information you shared there. So we'll get stuck into a few questions. Ed, have you got any questions you can pull out of the chat for us?
Well, they've quite neatly been three pretty succinct questions at the end. So one of them, which was a theme in the chat, is: does anyone close the chutes and introduce food waste at the same time?
Harriet, you probably
from ourselves would be no.
Best place for that one.
I mean, we at Hackney, we have generally got estates have got food waste already. However, we did add extra. So when we put in the new bin stores, we do make sure the food waste is there, and that's something that's included. So we have done it and added food waste, but we just make sure that that is obviously communicated throughout the consultation. And also we do our monitoring. We're actually looking at the moment into participation rates and whether that's increased or decreased, because as a borough at the moment, Hackney has seen a decline in its overall food waste recycling, and I think that's something which is kind of happening across London. So yeah, but we did do it. I don't think there's been a huge, I think kind of encouraging residents why it's better for them in the long run, less heavier bags to carry down, etc. is kind of what we did.
Excellent, thank you, Harriet. Good. Any other questions?
There was another one for Adam. How much does it cost for the extra ongoing supports, resource, etc.?
Good question. I was shuffling to see whether I was on mute. Good question. I wouldn't be able to answer that, to be fair, because what we've tried to do is we've tried to incorporate all services already on site and timings in relation to the removal of the waste. So if we talk about, they're already doing other things as well. So I can have a look and share the cost at a later time. But at the moment, like I say, we're just using the current resources that are within the blocks at the time or around the blocks.
Great. And there was another one. What equalities issues have anyone encountered and how have they been addressed?
I'm happy to kind of give Hackney's side. If I don't know if that's helpful, but I would encourage people to do an EIA prior to doing the work. So an equality impact assessment, and that's kind of just identifying any at-risk groups who might be impacted and what you're going to do to mitigate those. And what we've done at Hackney is ensuring that we've got a assisted collection procedure in place, and that's a formal procedure where if residents are unable for any reason to get their bags down to the bin stores, we can put something in place for them. So I would encourage to have that, because there will be instances where residents are physically unable to get to the bins.
Thank you, Harriet. It's really helpful. Helen, you did an impact assessment as well, didn't you? Did that bring out any additional pieces of learning, would you say?
Yes, I mean, as Harriet and Adam have both said, there's obviously customers living in the tower blocks that may be unable to easily get down to the external provision. And as Adam sort of pointed out as well, it's not just people with potential disabilities or elderly customers. It could be customers with young families and young children. So yeah, as Harriet says, it's really important to do the equality impact assessments just to highlight who those customers are and what their vulnerabilities are and how we can best help them. One
of the challenges, can I just add to that, Helen? One of the challenges that we had was we had a customer that was in a tower block, in the tower block that we've completed, and he'd injured himself doing sport, so he broke his leg, and he had a 6-week period of not being able to remove his bags, and he couldn't necessarily rely upon his neighbours to actually do that for him. So I think one of the things that we identified quite quickly and quite sharply, that some people might not consider that they need the assistance. So that's why we've made inroads in relation to speaking to the customer and saying, you know, if you've got any issues whatsoever, it might be for 1 day, 2 days, 6 weeks, 2 years, or forevermore, let us know and we'll assist you where we can. So yeah, that was one of the things that we had to implement quite quickly, because we knew that gentleman needed assistance.
Thank you for that. Good.
Yeah, so there's if we've got time, I mean, there's interesting one here. So if we're using safety as a reason for closing the chutes, are we putting ourselves in a position of saying that the blocks aren't safe because we are failing to maintain them properly?
You able to say that one, Dave?
Yeah, I think there's two different ways of looking at this, isn't there? You can make your building structurally safe in relation to the construction and the mitigations that you put in place. I think Adam's point was very pertinent in making buildings people safe. So you can spend a shed load of money on actually making sure that your bin chutes are compliant, that they're structurally sound, that you've got everything in place. But when you do the risk assessment that sits alongside that, there will always be a risk. So if you want to ultimately mitigate that risk, shut them down from a people perspective, therefore that there isn't the risk of a fire being spread from the bin store up through the bin chute, up through the hoppers into individual properties, and then smoke into communal areas. So you can spend the money for them to be chute safe, but to be ultimately safe within a building, I'd always propose closing them.
That's very clear. And would you say that because of the increased combustibility since the buildings were built, as in the combustibility of the waste, the increased volume of waste, even if you make it compliant, it's barely capable of actually taking that volume of material. The controls perhaps are easily damaged, and being able to say hand on heart that every day that is in a compliant condition is very challenging, isn't it? Because of the people element, but also the fact that the infrastructure is now dated.
It is outdated, but it also comes back to that educational piece. It's the educational piece that sometimes we struggle to communicate with 100% of our customer base on key aspects of tenancy management and building safety. So all it requires is somebody to throw down a bin chute the wrong kind of waste that is combustible, or something that blocks it. Therefore, and I'll ask anybody here who manages bin chutes in high-rise buildings, do you have a daily inspection of those bin chutes? I would say we don't, because we risk assess it. We may have a weekly inspection of the bin chutes, but it's like everything else. You can inspect it on a Monday morning. Somebody puts something down on a Monday afternoon and blocks it, and it becomes a risk and it becomes a challenge. Therefore, to mitigate that, just remove the issue completely and close the bin chute.
No, that's clear. And if you add lithium-ion batteries, for example, or some other high-risk item, then it takes it to another level, doesn't it?
Well, I'm sure mobility scooters and everything else is another workshop, Nigel.
What?
No, it is.
Can I just add something in there? About what Dean just mentioned. One of the plus points that we found in relation to the closing of the bin chutes and the planning of the bin chute closure is making sure that area is safe and it can be used. The area that would normally be used for a bin chute or something to be put under the bin chute, i.e. a bin. So you've got a space there that can be potentially used for something else, i.e. mobility scooter storage, obviously if the correct compartmentation work's been done, or cycle stores. We've got a number of blocks that have said, we really want a cycling store. So we've actually used that as part of the kind of the leverage to actually close the chutes in the future, is that's what we can plan in there as well. So yeah, I think around the table, I think there's around the screen, should I say, there's loads of learning points that we could we could capitalise on for sure.
And I think Harriet will back me up here. The disposal of lithium-ion batteries, specifically what I was referring to, is a major concern now for the waste disposal parts. And yeah, go on, Harriet.
Yeah, no, it's ever increasing, and yeah, putting more risk in for us. But I think on that, I think it's all about messaging. And if you're taking something away, it's, you know, making sure that you're saying the hard whys is really important. And I think you said that, Dean. It's kind of, sometimes it's easier just to have, it's better to communicate, we're doing this and this is why. The maintenance and the, you know, the same issues that will be there even if you improve the chute systems. And I think also just we have been able to provide maybe a storage solution for garden tools when we've removed the chute chambers for residents that have community gardens. And I think it's sometimes giving something back like that, as long as it's still meeting the fire safe criteria, is, yeah, it's nice. It's giving something back sometimes. Obviously that's not always possible, but yeah, that's kind of where we're at with that.
Yeah, great point, Harriet. Thank you. Any more there, Ed? Any more questions?
Yeah, just another one here. So should landlords or managing agents charge residents for closing chutes, and would it be classed as improvements?
I'll pick that one up to start with and then bring in follow members. I think it's up to the individual organisation. I think if you have robust leasehold charging systems in place and you've communicated well in advance so that those residents know very clearly what's coming down the path, then it's appropriate to charge. I think what lots of organisations have done post Grenfell is gone, I'll tell you what, we know that our buildings weren't safe, therefore it's inappropriate for us to charge you as the leaseholder for the fire safety work that we are going to undertake. I think that was okay for a period of time, but we've had lots of time since June 2017 to make sure we've put safe working practices in place to make sure that we can engage fully with leaseholders on what the future capital projects are going to look like. Therefore, I don't think that in our particular case, housing revenue account or rent paying residents should cross subsidise the improvement of fire safety in buildings for people who've exercised their right to buy or are leaseholders.
Yeah, it's helpful, Dean. Anything to add on that, Adam?
No, I haven't. Used good point, Dean. 100%.
That's it for questions. I would say, yeah, people read the comments there because there's some case studies in there from different people.
That's excellent. No, it'd be great to continue to put questions and answers on the chat, share documents, and let's keep that going. Huge thanks again to Helen and Dean and Harriet and Adam for the time and effort they've put into this today. It's hugely informative. We will be looking forward to further events, more live events and online events. So let's please keep this conversation going. And thanks very much, everyone who attended. Really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day and be in touch very soon. All the best.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.